Counter-Narrative News, really proud to announce another special series, this time on Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was the revolutionary leader of Vietnam, and he was born in 19th of May 1890. Now, the whole point of this new special series is basically this. It's to share and explain the historical ideologies, experiences, and personification of that, which pushes the oppressed masses, that's the colonized peoples, towards successful, functional, revolutionary frameworks of struggle towards liberation. That's the whole point of this series, contributing also to the other series that we have on C.L.R. James and Walter Rodney and M.N. Roy and others as well. The point is to share and engage and discuss this history and with yourselves as to the chronology, the genesis of how liberatory frameworks of revolutionary socialism and anti-colonialism came about. So Ho Chi Minh leaves Vietnam at the age of 21 years old, and he travels for 30 years across the world, going to Africa, North America, and into Europe. And in this time, basically, he's seeking out global alliances and unities in a common struggle against colonialism. From 1924 to 1925, he writes a series of articles kind of brought together called The Black Race, which is published in the first time in Russian in 1928. Now, one of these articles, which we'll share in a subsequent episode, is quite a well-known one for Ho Chi Minh around the oppression of black people in the USA. It's called On Lynching. Now, it seems like a Canadian-based Vietnamese academic called Dai Trang Nguyen has published all these articles on the black race by Ho Chi Minh, and also additional ones from the early 60s from him, and other selected works from Ho Chi Minh on what she calls systemic racism. And this book, it seems, was launched in February 2021. We're trying to make contact with this academic and discuss further about her research. Now, there's just an interesting parallel between Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X. Just as a little anecdote, it's quite nice and interesting, in that both Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh share the same birthday, albeit in different decades. That's 19th of May for Ho Chi Minh, and 1925 for Malcolm X. And they both worked at the same hotel in Boston called the Parker House Hotel. And it was a different decade that this hotel was also linked to the founder of the United Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA, of Marcus Garvey. And Ho Chi Minh attends the rallies of the UNIA when he was in New York. Really fascinating person. So you can see that Ho Chi Minh has a very sensitive and empathetic and an ethic of solidarity with oppressed people around the world, and especially black people in the USA and in Africa as well, and where he has experiences off the coast of Senegal, and witnesses the French colonialists basically laughing at his colleagues on a boat drowning to death. So this particular piece is called Civilization That Kills, and it was published in 1924 in the French language. So we're going to go to a direct quote. Civilization That Kills. How the whites have been civilizing the blacks. Some deeds not mentioned in history textbooks. If lynching, inflicted upon Negroes by the American rabble, is an inhuman practice, I do not know what to call the collective murders committed in the name of civilization by Europeans on African peoples. Since the day the whites landed on its shores, the black continent has been constantly drenched in blood. There, mass murders are blessed by the church, lawfully sanctioned by kings and parliaments, and conscientiously perpetrated by slavers of all calibers, from yesterday's slave traders to today's colonial administrators. Religion. It was to spread the blessings of Christianity that, towards 1442, the knights of the most Catholic king of Spain landed on the shores of Africa. Their apostolate began with massacres, quote unquote, and in the end, said their logbook of the journey, quote, "Our Lord God, who rewards all good deeds and ventures that have been undertaken in his service, has obtained victory over our enemies on that day. He has given laurels for our work and has recompensed our expenditures with the capture of 165 men, women, and children, besides those who have perished and killed." End of quote. Taken from the Spanish conquerors of the 15th and 16th centuries who occupied immense areas in Central and South America. They enslaved and exterminated the natives in the most barbarous way. The term conquistador has become a derogatory term to designate aggressors, slave traders, etc. That's an original footnote, by the way, just as an aside in Ho Chi Minh's text. And just going forward, until I say end of quote, it's all a quotation from this piece. So to continue with the quote. These pious conquistadors instituted a tradition. The list of property confiscated from Jesuits in Brazil in 1768 contains, among salvation crosses and other objects of worship, irons for branding slaves. For a long time, English societies for the propagation of Christianity drew its missionary resources from the slave traffic. On February the 12th, 1835, the Independent Church of the Parish of Christ Church, South Carolina, advertised in the local newspapers the sale of a prime gang of 10 Negroes accustomed to the culture of cotton and provisions. How many of these deeds can be quoted? The churches in North America were the most resolute enemies of the abolition of slavery. The kings. From Charles V down to Leopold II, King of the Belgians, from the virtuous Queen Elizabeth of England down to Napoleon, all the crowned heads of Europe were engaged in the Negro trade. All colonizing kings signed treaties and granted monopolies for the exploitation of black flesh. Quote, on August 27, 1701, His Most Catholic Majesty of Spain and His Most Christian Majesty of France granted the Royal Company of Guinea a 10-year monopoly for the traffic in Negroes in the colonies of America in order to obtain, by this means, laudable and mutual benefits for their majesties and their subjects. End of quote. Quote again, His Britannic Majesty undertook to introduce into Spanish America 144,000 Indians of both sexes and of all ages in consideration of a payment of 33 piastra crowns and a third piastra per head. End of quote. The slave traders. In 1824, a slave ship that had just taken on board Negroes from the shore of Africa bound for the West Indies was given chase by a cruiser. During the chase, several barrels floated past the cruiser. It was believed that the slave ship had got rid of its casks of water to speed its flight, but when the ship was boarded, moans were heard from a barrel left on the deck. 2 black women were found in it, almost asphyxiated. The slave traders had hit upon the means of lightening their ship. An English ship saved a foundering slave ship. Negroes as well as the crew were taken on, but when it was noticed that provisions were short, it was decided to sacrifice the blacks. They were lined up on deck and shot down in cold blood with 2 cannons. The conditions of the slaves. Arrested blacks were chained in pairs by the neck, the arms, and legs. A long chain linked them in groups of 20 or 30. Bound in this way, they were forced to walk to the port of embarkation, where they were bundled into the holds with no room, light, or air. For the sake of health, they were made to dance under a rain of whiplashes once or twice daily. It often happened that, in the hope of making room for themselves, men strangled each other and women drove nails into their neighbours' skulls. The sick, considered as a damaged and unsaleable goods, were thrown into the sea. As a rule, at the end of the journey, a quarter of the living cargo has succumbed to infectious diseases or asphyxiation. The surviving slaves were branded and numbered with white-hot irons like cattle and counted in tons and bales. Thus, the Portuguese Company of Guinea signed a contract in 1700 by which it undertook to supply 11,000 tons of Negroes. More than 15 million Negroes were transported to America in these conditions. About 3 million died or were drowned on the way. Those who were killed while resisting or during revolts have not been recorded. The infamous trade ended in 1850, giving way to a new form of slavery on a larger scale, colonization. The examples of atrocities that we are going to quote, if they were not proved to be irrefutable documents or related by Europeans themselves, would be hard to believe. A French trader in Madagascar, noticing that a theft had been made from his cash box, tortured with electricity many of his native employees suspected of the theft. It was discovered soon after that it was his son who had taken the money. A colonial administrator forced a black woman to remain in the burning sun for a whole day with a heavy heated stone on her head. Then he had her tied and bound and molten rubber poured into her genitals. As he could not make his two native servants work for nothing, a colonist flew into a rage and tied them to poles, poured kerosene on them and burned them alive. Exceptional isolated cases? No, typical cases, but let's quote a few collective crimes which cannot be attributed to the barbarous instincts of a few individuals, but for which the whole system is accountable to history. Quote, in our Algeria, related a French writer, continuing the quote, on the confines of the desert I saw this. One day some troops captured Arabs who had committed no other crime than fleeing from their conquerors. Brutalities. The colonel gave orders to put them to death on the spot without investigation or trial, and here is what happened. There were 30 of them. 30 holes were dug in the sand, and they were buried naked thereupon up to their necks, their shaved heads exposed to the sun at its zenith. So they should not die too quickly. Water was poured on them from time to time, as on cabbages. Half an hour later their eyelids were swollen, their eyes starting from their sockets, their swollen tongues filled their horribly gaping mouths, their skin cracked and roasted on their heads. End of quote. A Bangi tribe was unable to provide the quantity of rubber demanded by the concession. To force the tribesmen to make good the deficit, they had 58 women and 10 children arrested as hostages. They were deprived of air, light, food, and even water. From time to time they were tortured. Their cries, according to the plantation owners, helped to speed up work. And 3 weeks of atrocious sufferings, a great number of the hostages were dead. That year there was a drought. The crops had failed completely. That whole African region was desolated. The inhabitants ate grass and roots. Old people died of starvation. The civilizing government, however, demanded its taxes. The sufferers left their lands, gardens, and thatched huts to the latter and took refuge in the mountains. The administrator sent out hunting dogs and troops in pursuit. The fugitives were caught in a cave and killed by fumigation. I'm just going to just end the quote here because I'm just going to skip, because this is just account after account of utter brutality. And I'm just going to go to the last several paragraphs because it's just recounting details, and people can pause the video and read the sections that I'm just skipping. To continue the quote though, quote, the history of the European advance into Africa and the whole history of colonization is written from beginning to end in the blood of the natives. After massacres pure and simple, there are corvées, porterage, forced labour, alcohol and syphilis to complete the destructive work of civilization. The inevitable consequence of this monstrous system is the extinction of the black races. It is of painful interest to juxtapose to these facts some figures. It will be seen that the rapid enrichment of some colonizers corresponds exactly with the no less rapid depopulation of the exploited regions. From 1783 to 1793, the Liverpool Company made about £1,107,700 profit from the slave trade. During the same period, the population of the regions visited by that company lost 304,000 inhabitants. In 9 years, King Leopold II received £3,179,120 from the exploitation of the Congo. In 1908, the population of the Belgian Congo was 20 million. It was 8.5 million in 1911. In the French Congo, tribes of 40,000 inhabitants dropped to 20,000 in 2 years. Other tribes disappeared completely. In 1894, the Hottentot population amounted to 20,000. 7 years of colonization brought it down to 9,700. Nguyen Ai Quoc, Ho Chi Minh. End of quote. So this is the first in a series of articles on the oppression of black people that we're going to share with Ho Chi Minh. You can see towards the end he makes very clear that the enrichment of the colonizers was predicated on the oppression of the colonized people, and here he's obviously referring particularly to black people in Africa and in the diaspora brought forcibly there to the Americas. And really Karl Marx himself does also say that the rosy dawn of the capitalist era, to paraphrase, was predicated upon turning Africa into the warren for the hunting of black skins. But the difference between Marx, who actually didn't make a comment at all on the Haitian Revolution, which he absolutely must have been aware of, and C.L.R. James makes the corrective in the Black Jacobins. But the difference between Ho Chi Minh and others and Karl Marx is that Ho Chi Minh is an agent of revolution himself for Vietnam, seeking other colonized people in resistance as well, and trying to formulate forms of understanding and ideology to inform resistance towards liberation. And that is the difference. And then we go to different strands from this to understand other people who are grappling with these same kind of challenges. Hope that was of some interest, and please do continue to respond and engage and critique and ask questions, and of course please do share, and we wish you all the best.